Hi everyone. So I'm Ramatoulie Bobb, and I've been the project assistant on 2020 for the past 2 years, working alongside Martine, who you'll see later on, or you've probably already seen today. In the past 2 years, I've had the pleasure of getting to know all of the artists, and seeing their ideas, research come together and culminate in some of the work that you can see upstairs, which has just been nice to be part of the process, basically. So I'm not going to talk too much because we've got some great speakers here, but so I'm really pleased to introduce panel 2, which will be the first of 2 panels, as Susan highlighted earlier this morning, that will be focusing on the artists and their experiences of the residency, as well as a panel discussion, which I'm looking forward to getting into. So today we'll be hearing from Yuen Fong Ling, who was in residence with Sheffield Museums Trust, Shenece Oretha, who was in residence with the Hepworth Wakefield, and Christopher Samuel, who was in residence with Birmingham Museums Trust, and last but not least, Bindi Vora, who was with Ulster. So we'll start off with Yen's presentation. So please welcome Yuen to the stage.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Yuen Fong Ling, and I'm an artist, curator based in Sheffield. And my project, Monumentalize, was the result of a 15-month residency with Sheffield Museums, resulting in a series of 8 short films and an exhibition, We Are the Monument, at Graves Gallery from January 2024 to December 2025. And Kirsty Hamilton is in the audience, so say hello later. When I started the 2020 project, I had done a series of public interventions where I pushed and pulled a mobile plinth around the streets of Sheffield during the pandemic, asking people what they wanted to see in public space. It was a response to the removal of the Colston statue in Bristol 2020 and the Black Lives Matter and Roads Must Fall campaigns, and the debate around the right to gather and protest in public spaces. And Sheffield historically has rarely built statues and have had them removed and moved around when they don't chime with the times. I also began workshops with the empty plinth itself with performers and activists that I'd met during the period, and we worked in streets named after empire histories embedded into public spaces. We made these temporary plinth shapes and statues, part performance art, part protest, part public engagement. These streets, many residential, were being decolonised by the very act of people living in these spaces and creating their own narratives and histories. And in a research context, I was interested in how these art strategies could lead stakeholders, artists, community leaders, arts organisations and city councils to rethink the practice of commissioning public art, readdressing the balance, asking what new monuments and memorials could we develop, for whom and by whom. The residency process was an opportunity to take the foundations of these forms of inquiry into the museum and their archives and collections. The brief was open and exploratory, and I met with specialist curators and discussed how the idea of decolonisation translated into their everyday working practices and approaches to curation and their impact on audiences. This developed trust and empathy, and we were striving for a common goal through the work that I was making. And an important moment here was when I discovered a decorative dagger in the metalwork collections, and it got me thinking about scale and proximity, and what would be the impact of scaling up this representation of an Indigenous body, and how would it look in real terms, and what would happen if the edge of the knife was an empty plinth or platform. And here you can see the first thoughts become a reality, where I think where my practice lies in the creation of the circumstances whereby object curator, performer, site and camera converge in one space in one moment. And through the editing process, yeah, we missed a slide there. Through the editing process, an associative form of expression and agency emerged, filled with the tensions and pathos and paradoxes in the attempt to realise the image in my head, but the impossibility of, or near possibility of it. So you can see the films in the exhibition upstairs. Halfway through the process, having selected artworks and objects used in the filmmaking, I also began to develop ideas for thematic groupings in the form of a curated exhibition that would provide a context for the films, like an active form of conversation, a visual bibliography of sorts. I wanted to make a really strong visual presentation, something joyful and uplifting, bringing the debate on the streets and public spaces indoors, hence these hand-painted clouds that kind of created the first layer of the exhibition. You can't really see this in this slide. The exhibition actively explores the folding of layers, collapsing time and space, ideas and matter from archive objects with performers, from new films with collection artworks, with objects again, and now folding the visitor, activating audiences, asking what do they stand for and when and where. And these echoes of plinth forms, feet and the bodies of performers, folding and unfolding, revealing and concealing histories, a type of socializing of the archive. Sorry, there's a little slide missing there. The experience of encountering monuments in public space, this looking up and down position, was echoed in the display itself. When I considered the wooden dido structure rail here, I thought if you turned the gallery inside out, the dido became a plinth structure on which to build the exhibition. So I actively began to use this kind of building block approach to construct these monumental stacks, as they became known as, out of the existing artworks and objects. And in lowering the standard sight line where the eye would look, I was now giving access to other people's experiences. And going above the sight line, extending this feeling that the artworks were suddenly out of reach. So I was really playing kind of psychologically with the space. This is one of the 8 thematic stacks throughout the exhibition, focusing on the idea of build, exploring formal classical architectural features and motifs. Gilbert and George, Giovanni Piranesi, William Blake, and a newly conserved blueprint made from a stone carving of an imperial Chinese palace. These altering of visual perspectives, juxtapositions of scale and proximity and their psychological spaces, help to frame the presentation of the film. The film brought together a silver candlestick with a fire performer, martial artist and hip-hop dancer Nathan in Kelham Island Museum. The film explores this tension between performer, object, curator, site. We see the objects being handled, transported, being wrapped and unwrapped. The curator's choreography is challenged by the performers. A space for experimentation and improvisation using techniques for authentic somatic dance, movement and intent played out in this kind of mini psychodrama. Reflecting back, I created these post-production risk assessment statements based on those used by the gallery. They act as both an account of what happened during this mediated space of performance, testing and trialing something, but also as a testament to what could be done within the framework of the institutional's curatorial practice. The risk to the curator. when the fire performer, also a trained martial artist and breakdancer, punches and kicks around them. The risk to the candlestick, where the fire performer's apparatus, when spun, could knock the object over or subject naked flame or intense heat to the surface. The logistics and practicalities of making the film is the critical locus of the artwork, so it's in the process. As paradoxically as the films will have you to believe, there is always this critical distance between performer and object curator site. And it's also suggested by this compositional line, again, using this tension between the plinth and the figure that stands upon it. The idea of a candlestick without fire is another poignant moment. When activated by the performer, its surface sings and is brought alive by the flickering light of the fire, as it was designed. So this socializing of the archives, peopling of the collections, is a central concern of my practice now as a result of the 2020 project, considering what other objects are there without their function and how they could be repurposed and activated by our bodies. So the series of short films Monumentalize and the exhibition We Are the Monument have been a significant experience for me, artistically, academically, and professionally. It's built my confidence in making work with ambition, clarity of vision, trusting my instincts and intent. The critical thinking from this show is still being unpacked after 2 years since its creation, and it will continue to. Inspired by a sentence I wrote in the exhibition text panel, it became a concept for a public artwork that is now installed in an unassuming street corner above an empty shop in perpetuity. And it reads, "We are the memorial. As the bearers of memory. We are the monument, proving that from small beginnings, monumental endings can be achieved." Thank you.
I think it's funny that my mic dropped. I think that's really in keeping with the spirit in which I'm going to speak, I think. Okay. So hello everyone, I'm Shenece Oretha. It's nice to meet you. For the people I'm new to, I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and I often say that I am working with the mobilizing potential of sound. And actually, that has changed over the last decade in multiple ways, and one of the ways it's changed is through my residency at the Hepworth Wakefield and along the 2020 project. So I just want to start with some thank yous in terms of, I always try and start my day with some gratitude. They say it makes it a good way to start your day. So thank you to the 2020 team for holding the project. I think sometimes it's actually really interesting for institutions to grant you a almost like a ticket that might be a bit blank. In my sense, I really would like to work with improvisation, I like to work with sound, but I am not always sure what the impact might be. And so giving me a space to think was I'm really thankful for. I want to thank the artists for the rigor of our conversation over the project and for holding each other emotionally as well as psychologically and a whole bunch of ways. I think to talk about the project is to talk about the way in which we spoke together. I want to thank the Hepworth Wakefield for, again, taking a punt on me, in some ways. I do have a background of work, but not maybe working in with archival collections except for one other work. And I want to thank the artists that I made the sculptures with, the artworks and the artifacts, and the complicated relationship between those three things for allowing me to work with them. I think sometimes when working with the term decolonization or anti-colonial, which is my preferred way of speaking about it, anti-colonial, sometimes we can gloss over the actual real emotional, physical violence that colonization entails, right? And we're seeing it all over our screens and in our social media very much right now. And I think it's really important that we hold space when we're working in decolonialized or trying or attempting to think about the decolonial, the anti-colonial, as that is an ongoing regime globally, as well as how it impacts us. And when I was working as an artist on this project, there's so many different ways violence can rear its head, okay? And so I just want to take a little bit of a moment to also say that some of the things I'm going to speak about are uncomfortable. And I think it's really important to just hold a minute to invite you to and remind you of your agency to take a breath. And also, if it's not something, some of the things I'm going to speak about are affecting you, to take pause, okay, and take rest. Because when we're talking about the colonial, I think it's very important to talk about how it impacts us, right? It's not something that is what do you call that? An absence of the body. And so I really think it's really important, and that's the kind of work I do. I'm talking about the impact it's had on me, and hopefully talking about the ways in which we can congregate and sit in that. Okay, so what I want to invite you to do is to take the deepest breath you have taken today. The deepest breath you have taken today. That's okay, no worries. It's actually really, I think in some way, because I invite my ancestors to go everywhere with me, and it's like there's a lot of sound disruption, and I think that's like very on the nose for the type of work I do. You'll see it as well. So, just a couple of seconds to take the deepest breath you have taken today, and send it down to your toes and bring it back up all the way through your body. I'm going to do it too. Okay. So the presentation or my summation of my project is, what can we make of this? What can we make of this? And the work I owe my process to is this one here, Zong by Mnobese Philip. When there is not a lot for descendants of the colonial and transatlantic slave trade to reckon with the violence in which has impacted their bodies and their ancestors and their future generations in cell and in spirit. I think artists can try and come up with the ceremony and the ritual and the method in which we can think about what that impact might be and to try and work through it. That might not always be healing, and it sometimes might be violent, and we might come up against violence when we're trying to go through those processes, because it is a really difficult thing to face and to think with. And so there are a couple of things struck through here: colonial silence, silencing, silence is present, silence is presence, silence is within, sounding silence. My project was called Listening with and in the Hepworth Wakefield collection. I often say I'm an artist currently listening from London, and I moved my listening with me to Wakefield to look at the collection there. And I was really thinking about the cultures of silence and what that might mean for us. And it's really difficult to be the voice of dissent. Actually, I was at another symposium yesterday. I'm a bit symposiumed out a little, but I'm here today. I'm very ready. Where somebody, a doctor, was voiced some dissent in the space, and it made me want to rewrite my entire presentation. So that's why I'm looking at my presentation, because the words I'm going to say might not be exactly what I'm looking at on the slides. It's difficult to be the voice of critique in a space, especially a space that is not yet contending with whiteness, not only as the people, but as a philosophy. And one of the things that whiteness kind of also entails is that sense of silencing and erasure. And also for me, like through my educational background, it's disembodied. It feels disembodied, right? Very neck up sort of way of looking at things. And I really wanted to engage with an embodied methodology. And then we were working, like you're saying, on the backdrop of Black Death, right? Around kind of in the United States of America, but also in the UK. And actually how much of the projects, this ongoing projects that I'm seeing in the last 5 years are a result of Black Death in some way, to think about people wanting to make change and the relationship to that change being because of the, again, seeing and depicting Black Death. So, but not to say that silence is always problematic, right? Silence can be something that we need and something that affords us a sense of healing, a sense of reverence. But again, it's the question who gets to have and is afforded silence, and then also should every space be silent? So on my first visit to Hepworth Wakefield, you have this real sense of reverence, you know. I was thinking about the architectures of galleries and the way the concrete floor resonates the sound, and the way the amount of glass in a building kind of changes the frequency of the sound, and how your voice bounces, so you are put into a reverence of whisper, right? And that really made me intrigued about the ways in which these galleries enforce reverence, even if they have real difficult subject matter, difficult subject matter. You really are met with your body almost, or your voice needing to be silenced, or you would echo. I don't really mind being loud, and I'm going to try and also try not to say too much, because, you know, hopefully we have time for conversation. But yeah, it was really interesting, and I was interested in working with that collection, particularly as an artist who, I went to the State School of Fine Art, and next door to it is the British Museum, and I'd walk the halls in the British Museum and go to the African collection and have this real issue, because I really enjoyed the work, I really enjoyed the artifacts, and I was looking at them, and I was thinking, I'm happy to see you, but you're not meant to be here. You're not meant to be here. And the Hepworth Wakefield collection, including the British modernist sculpture, I wanted to think about the relationship that people speak about all the time, but like I don't see a lot of actual conversation happening about these things. I see, like, one of my things is, like, it's not just about representation or having Black artists in your collection, but actually to hear the things being spoken aloud, right? And to give space to the conversation that these things bring up, not just holding the artifacts or the artworks. And so I attempted to sound out what my problem was. I came in with a problem. I had a problem with the influence and inspiration that British modernists may have took, British modernist sculptors may have took from colonial objects, and the lack of relationship or resource to thinking about how that might have happened. And so I used the language of sound to think about the ways, because we use it every day, I think, right? I used the language of sound to set off on my project. So the ideas of repercussion, the idea of toll, the idea of being struck by something, resonance, the record, right? The record is something that we use in archive, but also the record of the musical record. Something being instrumental or instrumentalized, for example, and the word tone and atone. So atone being to kind of create a sense of healing and in a method. Oops. And so I came across this book thanks to Eleanor Clayton, who is my time at the Hepworth Wakefield was had so many different changeovers, and that was one of a problem actually, because the person who sought the project left on maternity leave. So a problem and a celebration, but a problem particularly for me because the person who wanted the project in the institution, for example, and sought the project left. And so who was left to pick up the pieces to do the work with me? And that was a very difficult thing for me because I needed the help. And there was people who promised a kind of relationship with the wider gallery, right? And it's really interesting to hear how Manchester, because of Holly, is getting new audiences. And I can tell that they wanted new audiences from me, but I was more intrigued at how they were engaging with the audiences. And I also didn't want to bring in audiences without knowing how they were going to handle those audiences. So I didn't want the burden to be on me. I don't think it's an artist's burden to seek the audience. I think it's the institutions. But Eleanor Clayton, a wonderful researcher, and wrote a wonderful book about the writings and archives of Barbara Hepworth, also pointed me to this book, Henry Moore at the British Museum, where he waxes lyrical about oceanic African artworks and artifacts. And it was great to have proof. You know? There was also a thing that I was finding in the institution where these are blurry because they don't have good photos of these things, okay? I just wanted to let you know. And so these are the Barbara Hepworth artifacts. So artists as collectors themselves, again, trying to find the proof for the relationship and inspiration that the British modernist sculptors were using the artworks artifacts to create their forms and their shapes and their influence their work. But one of my problems was open the drawer with these artifacts, and what did they call them? Primitive objects, okay? And so I was like, okay, so this is an interesting thing that is happening here. And, I went back to them and, that drawer and the labeling was written a long time ago and nobody changed it. And so the artist, again, in the institution can be the one that can point to something, but actually, again, is that my job? I'm coming to do some research, but I'm also finding things in and around the institution to talk to. And so one of the things that I found in my research in the archive was the silent music of bronze is the relationship or the invitation written about one of William Pye's works, the California Bronzes, or the series of California Bronzes. And I was really interested in this idea of the silent music in bronze. And it made me think, and I was already intrigued, and I've been doing a lot of research, and more so if you look at my other work, about the defiant nature in which the steel pan was created. And this is an image of the kind of hammering process to making the steel pan. In Trinidad and Tobago, and I wanted to think about the ways in which I could defy. So thinking about the silent music in bronze, can I bring out some of that silent music through the method in which the steel pan was created by hammering? I'm not going to go into this because I don't have that much time, but again, to think about, I had somebody call my idea for sounding out these sculptures as instruments, and they said it was silly. And I said, I promise you it's not silly, but just because I might not be using a scientific method, I think sound has a resonance in it, and maybe that sound could extract a toll that can speak about the emotional impact that these sculptures have on me, okay? And so there are some really interesting ways in which Nobese Philip in Zong uses to sound out the silences that might be locked in the text of law, right? And I was like, maybe locked in these sculptures is the emotional impact that I could draw out between the relationship between colonial influence and inspiration. One of the things, just to speak about audiences, is that I was really trying to, thank you, I was really trying to engage with communities around the city. But again, there's a relationship with, if everybody's doesn't live in the city, the workers, then they might not have the relationships that you might need. And again, I went out and I saw, and I had my own relationships about trying to sound out what the emotional impact of these works might be on people. And thank you to the Stuart Hall Library for hosting the Artist Kitchen Salon series, where I held a resonant histories dinner, and we sounded out like lots of ways in which the steel of cooking implements can be used. So how did I go about the method? I made the sculptures into instrument. You can see images of me tapping on them, and yes, they let me hit Henry Moore. And I really do appreciate the bravery of the institution to allow me to do something like that, right? And it's interesting though, one thing I do want to point out before I end and close is that there are not a lot of because of the backdrops in which we were working in, I think there was a real lack of wanting to share the work I was doing. And it was not because, it was because, I think there's fear, when Sonia Boyce did what they did, was it in Manchester? Mm. Yeah? The newspapers would write that. What would they do if they got this image? You know what I mean? So I think that's why they could have sent this somewhere, but they didn't, right? So Told is the name of the exhibition. I would have shown you a video. We do not have time because I do talk too much. But that is a little sound of one of them just quickly. That's what they sound like, those sculptures. You got a real sense of there is an emotional resonance in those works when you sound them. And so these are the images. And actually a lot of the images they shared of the exhibition was not of my work. It was of the collection, because they were drawing their audiences in, come and see the Hepworth, come and see the Moore, but they don't know Shenece Oretha. And so, that's an okay thing. But actually what I was really interested in is, how are you going to position me as an artist within the institution? Lastly, to look beyond, so the work that they have collected in the institute is a work that I have made to sit in their gallery. It sits over a bench and looks out of the window to kind of look beyond the gallery space and to think about sitting with the work and not looking at the work, but sitting with the space of the work. I also have made off with the Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth work sound, and so, I'm still using those. And I'm making prints that are like sonic tapping on the copper. And I'm going to have a show next year in Glasgow with the Glasgow Print Studio, showing more of these kind of action sound prints. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for 2020 for the invitation. Okay, next slide. So I thought on the screen, it's a photo of my mum's brothers, sister, and I'm in the background crying. I thought I'd share this image because my uncle who's holding me just passed away in the last couple of weeks. And my mum's behind the camera. She's the one who took the photo. So for my 2020 residency, I was partnered with Birmingham BMT, Birmingham Museum. I'm second generation, Black, Caribbean, British. Grandparents came over during the Windrush. On my mother's side, they're Grenadian. On the father's side, they're Jamaican. They lived in Brixton. I had family in Birmingham who we would see regularly. That's why I chose Birmingham Museum. Next slide. So, for my residency, I wanted to find out what is already in their collections relating to Black and disabled histories, whose voices are captured, how it's catalogued, and what is missing, and to make something in response. Birmingham had carried out a survey previously to catalogue a lot of the items which they held, which relates to, which had connections to disability. But I found many of those items had tenuous links to disability. And this is not a criticism of BMT. Social attitudes have changed. What's considered worth preserving has somewhat changed and had an effect. And also cataloguing has also changed. The items on the screen on this slide were personal to me because of, for instance, rocking horse. Anyone who's spent any prolonged periods in hospital would know those rocking horses were in every hospital across the land from that period. Next slide. So image of me in the collections store. I realized quite quickly that there were major gaps in representation within the collection. A lack of black, disabled, and black disabled lives. There is currently and historically a wider lack of engagement between the black disabled community and cultural spaces. It's not just a Birmingham problem. It's a national and global issue. So it's important for me to engage with the community of Birmingham to capture their real experiences and making those connections. Naively, I thought it would have been easier, but it was really challenging for a number of reasons. I ended up speaking to 170 people before I could get my way into the community. I lack that. So, for instance, a lack of community cohesion, a lack of trust between my community and the museum, which resulted in my residency taking longer than planned. But in the end, with the support of the museum and their staff, I found ways, and the community, I found ways to connect and met some amazing people who were part of the project and helped to magnify the impact further. Next slide. Image of me and the two co-directors, Zach and Sarah. Hold on. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. I'll come back to that. We can talk about that. So this is a photo of the exhibition I created and curated. It contains stained glass work, newly collected oral histories, drawings, prints, collection items from BMT and Medcap Midlands Archive. The show is called Watch Us Lead. The title came from connecting and speaking with multiple disabled people of colour. There was a theme that emerged that through speaking to them, which they all were leading in some way, not in some way, in their own way, whether that was setting up charities, through advocacy work, changing policies within their workplace, or changing family dynamics. They were all breaking new ground and taking the lead, which I realized is also something what I've been doing. And that was kind of like an epiphany for various different reasons. And finding new ways of working and new routes into being a disabled artist and making real world impact. In 2020, and the support of Birmingham Museum, and particularly Zara, it made me realise the power that I hold and how I wanted to develop that. Next slide. So addressing those missing local black disabled voices in the museum's collection is at the centre of the exhibition. I spent a year finding and connecting with people of colour with disabilities in the local community, listening to their experiences and stories, but also building a rapport and holding a space for them to speak about their experience, where some of them have never had the opportunity to speak about it because they've been sidelined. It ended up me recording 10 disabled people's oral histories. They spoke about topics or themes relating to religion, school, work, discrimination, family, ambition, autonomy. But the theme of finding their own ways runs through all of them. Each person had something really important to say. For each oral history, I also created pen and ink drawings inspired by poignant moments in each person's life, and most of them had their portraits taken, all of which will now sit permanently in the city's collection. The fact that some of them didn't want their portrait was also telling for me about taking up space and being visible. On screen is part of what I've exhibited. So, drawing and a portrait. I thought it was important for them to have a portrait taken to sit alongside. Next slide, please. So this is the stained glass piece that I also created, which is called Pray For Me. It's 6 foot by 3 foot, and it explores the relationship between Caribbean heritage, disability, religion, and the legacy of colonialism in response to Birmingham's historic stained glass collection. I'm planning to develop this work and create a bigger body of work, which I think would be amazing. My time with 2020 and BMT has helped me realize the potential to drive change in the sector and my leadership potential. It's elevated my practice and raised my profile, but it's given me time to really research as a disabled practitioner and as an artist who gets parachuted in and out. You're having to do multiple things. So having this space, but also having the support of people championing me and opening the door for me was next level in my growth. And it gave me really, time to grow and find ways to work effectively in an ableist culture and sector. And to be honest with you, there is a ceiling for disabled artists. Often their work is only shown in disabled-led spaces or segregated spaces or certain institutions that the normal kind of allies. So for me, applying for 2020, that was strategic. I knew it wasn't geared towards disabled practitioners. And I'm a firm believer in not preaching to the choir. But in order to create societal change, I think that this society needs to reflect honestly. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here and to share space with my fellow artists today and talk about some of the work that I developed during my residency at Ulster Museum. I think for me, throughout my practice, I've always been interested in how ideas of resistance and resilience are shaped by our surroundings, histories and lived experiences. By using glyphs and an archive of personal and found photographs that I've been collecting over the last decade, I often draw on the intersections between language, culture, and their inherent power dynamics. One of the things that I was drawn to with the Ulster Museum collection and Northern Ireland more broadly was its unique position between colonialities, the complexities with Ireland's relationship to the British Empire, their involvement in colonialism, but also the histories of migration and movement resonated with some of my family's heritage. So in a kind of slightly condensed version, my great-grandfather left India in 1908 and settled in Kenya as an economic migrant during the construction of the East African Railway under the British Empire. So decades later, in 1966, my grandfather then located himself and his 7 children to Uganda, only to be exiled in 1972 under General Idi Amin's dictatorship. That year, 90,000 South Asians were given a 90-day notice period to leave the country due to Amin's belief that South Asians were stifling the economic prosperity of the country, despite the fact that the vast majority, like my grandfather, had responded to an invitation to come to the country to support Uganda's developing infrastructure. When my parents met and married, they settled in the UK, hence why I'm here. My ancestral heritage has often been spoken about through the trauma of displacement and loss, but also through the rebuilding of community and kinship. As part of my initial inquiry into navigating this kind of very vast collection, I began collating provocations like some of the ones that you see on the screen here to help prompt some of the lines of inquiry into the collections and how I might want to navigate that space. Accessing the collection, I mean, obviously I'm based in London and I was working with a museum in Northern Ireland, and they were very generous enough to give me a complete carte blanche into the back end of their CMS system, which I think for many would not be the route that I think some collections would take in that way. So it was a lot of freedom. It gave me a sense of exploring some of these objects and these collection terms on my own terms, which were unmediated by some of maybe the conventional museum structures. I was able to run as many searches as I wanted, and a lot of the initial inquiries that I was looking into were rooted in the ideas of migration. Some of it was related to places that my family had been, so thinking more broadly about East Africa, India, but also the UK as well. When I was digging deeper into some of the collection and the objects and how they were categorized, this term Asian, which has come up earlier today as well, became something that was recurring. Whereas in the kind of collection database and searches that I was making, something was kind of interesting about that, as it was representing just a much broader range of South Asia and Asia more broadly without further context. And I think it emphasized these imperialist heritages of Western relationships to knowledge and the living world. For me, this was really the genesis of where my project started. And as the curator I worked with, Anna Leishing, would say, it gave me a space to trouble the collection. One of the crucial aspects of my research led me beyond Ulster Museum and took me to the Macmillan Library in Nairobi, Kenya. This is a colonial library that up until 1958 would only allow white people to access its records, books, and histories. I spent time looking specifically at the newspaper records from the East African Standard published in 1972. It was through the cuttings that I was able to piece together the lead up to Idi Amin's coup of Uganda in 1971, as well as the aftermath following the expulsion, not only between neighboring countries, but also with the UK, where many individuals who were living in Uganda had British protectorate passports. It emphasized the racial rhetoric and immigration phobia that we hear all too often. Just through the front pages of the newspapers, I began to see a pattern emerging that echoed the collection database. These initial digital sketches specifically pinpointed the number of times the word Asian was used on the single front page of the East African Standard newspaper. And the sound was kind of referencing the stamp that you might get at a customs border to get your paper stamped in order to leave Uganda and be able to travel further. Language occupies many spaces between. It's rooted in the tools and chemistry that belong to photography, but combined references like pictorialism, drawing, structure. And for me, it's these traces of pen that disguise and redirect the edges of form and matter. Encounters with displacement and reinvention have often influenced my thinking about image making and the role images have as social and political tools. With most of the photographs that were in the newspaper articles depicting individuals or groups of people traveling or in motion with their belongings, I wanted to use this method of image transfer to articulate an aspect of silence and loss. In the case of my family, when they were exiled from Uganda, they were forced to give up their livelihoods and cherished keepsakes, only being able to take the equivalent of £50 and 2 suitcases worth of belongings. Often checkpoints and forced searches meant that the valuable items like jewelry, photographs, and other possessions had to be hidden and concealed. Items were often stitched into the lining of saris, children's toys, or in metal tins holding food for their journey. This chapter of the work that I called Suffer or Journey referenced multiple perspectives. The images from the newspapers depicting the arrival in the UK, shadow images taken from my family's archives, and the stamping of the word Asian, reminiscent to the sound of the customs border stamp, as well as the hanging sculpture describing the methods of concealment. Where one chapter looked more broadly at the wider political history and collective journey, this chapter focused on a more personal migration story. Through photographs made between the 1950s and the 1990s, some of which were taken by my grandfather, who was a photographer and also ran a photographic studio in Uganda, they capture family life and travel in Uganda, Kenya, India, and the UK. Each piece became a way of joining these entangled narratives and the overlaps in the archive, enabling a reimagination of the gaps in their story, responding to provocations like, what does language miss? How do Western translations lose or perhaps deconstruct meaning? And more crucially, who owns my traditions? The main image that you see here, repeated on the wallpaper, was taken from a newspaper in 1972, showing a South Asian woman being marched onto a bus by a Ugandan army official. The gestures in itself are so powerful. The pointing, the firm stance, the cast of pink over the image is derived from military-grade film that Kodak developed in the 40s as a form of surveillance to show up potential targets in a rural landscape. For me, this process has been so transformative being on this residency. It enabled me to think more about the elasticity of photography and how different processes and mediums can evoke a different reading or connote meaning. The title piece of the body of work that I developed which is on display in the show, I Dreamt of Lost Vocabularies, considers the megaphone as a conduit to convey messages, narratives, and stories of my ancestors who are no longer with us. How can we ensure those experiences are not forgotten? And how do we represent the more nuanced, diasporic experiences that don't fit neatly into a box? The outer shell of the megaphone, which you see on the left side here, is wrapped in an image of the banyan tree, as a tongue of plaited silk spills out from the iridescent vessel, depicting the metaphor of language, both capable of conveying a spectrum of emotions from pain to joy, and bring to light a narrative of resilience, community, and kinship. We all wear multiple hats in the arts, and as many people may know, I'm also the senior curator at Autograph, and one of the things that came out of this project and the research that I was doing was actually this exhibition that opened a few weeks ago called I Still Dream of Lost Vocabularies. It was inspired by some of the research and the conversations I was having, not only through my own kind of interests and ideas, but also through some of the artists that I was meeting along the way. It brings together 13 perspectives, and very global perspectives as well, including works by Henna Nadim, Rina Khaled, Sheda Soleimani, who are using collage as both method and metaphor. It looks at these kind of intersections between both cut paper and generative AI, and how political dissent and erasure kind of recur as these themes in artists' work. It's on until the 21st of March, so if you do find yourself in Shoreditch in London, please do visit. Thank you so much.